Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. 25 years. It's a quarter of a century, and certainly a milestone very much worth celebrating. There are some people here in the room that have been part of HBF for all 25 of those years. Some of us a little bit less, some that have just come to HBF in the last couple of years, some just in the last year. And we felt it would be important to just take a little bit of time tonight and go over some of the history about how HBF came to be and some of the things that have happened over the years. And of course, it's a lot of history. We can't begin to cover it and all, and I'm going to try to rush and get through it all in a reasonable amount of time. And then when I'm finished, we're going to have a little panel discussion, and I'm going to invite 5 people that were part of the original group that started the church to come up, and we'll have them share a few reflections about those days early on. They say, people that study this kind of thing, that 1/3 of all church plants fail within the first 5 years. 1 out of 3 don't make it to 5 years. And so the fact that we're here at 25 years is very significant. But when we think about who we are as a local church and celebrating this 25 years, it's actually important to go back well beyond or well before 25 years. Want to go back to almost 100 years. This quote here emphasizes the importance of knowing our history because it's part of our identity. Part of who we are as a local church is because of people that have come before us. The influence that godly men and women have had on their peers and their children and their young people who in then turn grew up and had influence on others right down to the present day. And I want to go back to 1922. In Elmira, 2 evangelists came from Guelph and rented the theater and had gospel meetings there. And there were several people saved, including a Mr. and Mrs. Emmanuel Martin, who were the aunt and uncle of John Martin, who we're going to hear more about in a few minutes. And there was actually a little church started in Elmira back in 1922. And then there was gospel meetings held in Linwood, and there was a little church started there as well. Now, neither of those churches survived. They were the 1 out of the 3, but yet those beginnings had an influence on the community. In 1930, a young man named John Martin was stunned to hear that his older brother had just been killed in an accident at the train crossing in Wallenstein. And it caused John to wonder about his own destiny. What would have been his destiny if he had been the one that had been killed? John Martin was an old order Mennonite, and so he was a religious man. He was outwardly religious, but he says in his biography that he really, before that, gave very little thought to spiritual things. But because of his brother's death, he began to take things more seriously, and he decided that maybe he should try to be a better person, a better Mennonite. And so he went through some things with the church and joined the church officially. He told me how he had a blue suit and he went to his mother and had her dye it black because that would be more plain. He was going to be more serious about this. And he did things like that. He said that he had on his horse, he drove a horse and buggy, he had little bells on the braces, the bridle. And he took those off because that was worldly. But all these things didn't give him any peace. As he put it, I thought this would give me peace of mind, but I was still unsaved and I knew it. Oops. In August 1931, he went to a gospel meeting at that little church in the center of the picture there. It was a wood church on the edge of Wallenstein. It's long gone now. There were a lot of Black immigrants from the U.S. that settled in the area around Wallenstein and Hawkesville. These were people that fled slavery. And this church had been a Black church, but it wasn't used anymore in the 1920s and 1930s. And so a local evangelist came and used it to have gospel meetings. And John Martin went to one of these gospel meetings, and he put his trust in the Lord as his Savior when he heard the gospel. And a number of others were saved at that meeting and around the same time. And they got together and they said, well, we should get together. And so they got a house in Hawkesville. It belonged to a Nathan Martin, and they began to have what they called the Hawkesville Gospel Mission. And they would meet Sunday afternoons for Sunday school. They would still go to their own churches Sunday morning, but they would come for Sunday school at the Gospel Mission. And there were some people from the Old Order Mennonite, there were some from the modern Mennonites, there were some Lutherans, there were some others, and they would all come together and they would study the Bible, and they would have Sunday school for the children, and the older children they would teach in English, and the younger children they would teach in Pennsylvania Dutch. And they studied the Word of God together. And so these meetings carried on for several years. Around the same time, down here in Heidelberg, some of the Hoffman family were saved. Randy and Ken's grandfather and his siblings and their spouses, and they joined this little group in Wallenstein as well, in Hawkesville as well. As these new believers began to tell others about their faith in Christ and about the fact that you could know that you were saved, they began to get resistance from their friends and the people, especially in the Old Order community. The Old Order preachers and the bishop began to warn people about this strange doctrine that these men and women were talking about. But they were still carrying on in their churches, but having these afternoon meetings. But by 1934, it was clear that a decision needed to be made. And so the question rose, well, if we start our own church, what's that going to be like? And they had had a number of different people coming and teaching them in this Sunday school. They had some from the Russian Mennonites, some from the modern or the red brick Mennonites, some from the Brethren, and some from other groups. And so they had had lots of different input from people about what the local church should look like. And so they had to decide, well, what are we going to do? And John Martin, in his biography, writes that eventually the whole group decided that we should gather to the Lord alone, simply as an assembly of believers with the Word of God as our sole guide, and not be part of any other association or group. And so on the Sunday morning of September the 9th, 1934, just a little bit over 90 years ago, this group met together for the first time on a Sunday morning and broke bread. And that was the beginning of what became called the Hawkesville Gospel Hall. That Sunday afternoon, this group then went out to the Conestoga River by Wallenstein, and 15 of them were baptized by immersion in the Conestoga River. And John Martin told me that day that he's never been to a bigger baptism in his life. And they estimate that there was well over 1,000 people that gathered along the banks of the Conestoga River to watch these young upstarts. Most of them were just in their 20s, probably some that were just teenagers, and being baptized one after another in the river. And this was completely unheard of. And it really rocked the whole community, as you can imagine. And so the Hawkesville Gospel Hall began. And many of these people were ostracized by their families. They were, in some cases, completely cut off. But the church began to grow. Some left, others came. And you see the picture there on the right of that couple. I'm not sure who they are. We are not our own. We are bought with a price. And that was the testimony that they gave to their neighbors. The picture on the left is the baptism in the river. And the picture at the bottom is the Hawkesville Gospel Hall. This building was built in 1939. They realized they needed a bigger place to meet. And so that building was constructed. And the builder was Ezra Fry, who is Marlene Toy's father. He was kind of the general contractor that oversaw the construction. That building is still there. It's a private home now. You wouldn't even really recognize it, I don't think, if you drove by it, but it's still there on the corner of Hawk and Getty Street in Hawkesville. And so they carried on there till 1968. As it grew, they eventually filled the place up, and they decided that they needed a bigger church. And so in 1968, the Wallenstein Bible Chapel was built. And so the name was changed from Hawkesville Gospel Hall to Wallenstein Bible Chapel, and they moved out to Wallenstein. Now, Heidelberg is an offshoot from Wallenstein, but we're not the first offshoot. We're not the first Heidelberg. In fact, we're the fifth. And you see there the various other churches that have begun from Wallenstein. And one of the elders there told me that it is their mindset that they always want to be thinking about when's the next hive off coming. And as you see, there have been many. Which brings us to the start of Heidelberg Bible Fellowship. Or at that time, it was St. Clement's Bible Fellowship. By the late 1990s, Wallenstein had grown significantly. There was about 450 or so in the congregation. And the elders had approached the congregation about hiving off. And initially, there wasn't a lot of response to that. And so they were also thinking about, well, should we build a bigger auditorium? Because we're packed out. And so that, they were considering both options. And Ken was telling me that there was an elders meeting where Ken was one of the elders at Wallenstein at this time, where they were wrestling with this decision. And it just seemed that the Lord really made it clear to the men there that, no, really, we should be hiving off again. And so that Sunday, they put it to the congregation once again, and they said, we really feel that the Lord wants us to hive off. And we'd like everyone to prayerfully consider whether you should be part of that. We're going to put a list on the wall at the back, and you have 2 weeks to indicate whether or not you'd like to be part of this group. Now, this is all second, third-hand information, so I maybe haven't got the details quite right, but that was sort of the gist of it. And the elders felt that if they had 100 people sign up, that this would be a clear indication that the Lord was in it and they should go ahead. 100 out of 450, that's a significant number. And it just so happened that Randy was there that Sunday preaching. He and Sherry were living down by St. Thomas at the time, but he was back preaching. And he and Sherry put their names at the top of the list. And within 2 weeks, there were 85 people on that list. And although they didn't hit the 100 that the elders had wanted, they felt this was a significant enough number that they should proceed. And so this group of people began to meet Sunday afternoons in the Wallenstein basement, beginning to think and pray and plan for what St. Clement's Bible Fellowship would look like. There's just some resources on the history that I just gave you. That little booklet on Wallenstein Bible Chapel actually has a lot of this history. I've got it on a PDF. If you want a copy, I can send it to you. But all of these books are really well worth reading. So, September 19th, 1999, 25 years ago, the first meeting of the new St. Clement's Bible Fellowship was held in the community center in St. Clement's, the same room where we had our Life Week meetings last fall. And there you see Randy at the front preaching. And there was a group of, 50 or 60 or so people, and adults plus children then. And the work carried on in St. Clement's for a couple of years. And we're going to hear some stories from some of the people who were there at the end. But one of the big challenges was the Sunday school. They had a lot of children and trying to find classes and just how that was all going to work. But and sometimes the community center wasn't available, and so they had to find other places to hold the meeting. The picture there in the lower right corner is Henry and Lillian's garage. And there was several times they had meetings in the garage. One time they used the barn at Chatterbox Farm just here on the edge of Heidelberg. Randy was telling me one time they had to use the hotel, and it was Super Bowl Sunday, and there was a big blue flashing Bud Light sign that was in his face as he was preaching that morning. These are the things you do when you're starting a new church. To save money, they just did their own bulletins. And so every month, somebody else would design the bulletin for the month. And there you have a list of the various people that are still part of HBF. Actually, why don't you stand up? If you're part of that original group in 1999, please stand up so everyone can see who you are. Very good. We're here today because of the work and the effort and the prayer that these folks put into HBF. Let's just give them applause. We thank the Lord and we thank you. And it's a blessing to have so many that were there from the beginning still here today. I listed a few of the first. Some of this information is hard to come by. We're not as good of record keepers as we should be, but we think Taylor Canard was the first new baby born in this setting. First elders. We owe a tremendous debt to Wallenstein. As we've talked here about hiving off, and we thought about, who would go and be part of that work, and you just think about the hole that it would leave behind. And they sent 3 of their elders to be part of this new work. And Henry and Aaron were both men who were at the stage in life where many men are thinking about retiring. And they came and started this new work, which was a lot of work. Deacons, I think Rob is a deacon for life. He's been, he doesn't look any older either, so it hasn't had too much of an impact on him. Jim, we thank the Lord for these men. They had a lot of work because one of the things that right away, they began to look for a permanent building and to try and find a suitable place to buy, and then all that involved, and so on. We'll hear a bit more about that. And then Randy and Sherry. Randy and Sherry were not at Wallenstein just as this time was coming up, but they were in the process of moving back to this area. And one of the very first acts of this new church was to commend Randy and Sherry to full-time ministry for the Lord. And this is the letter of commendation dated September the 13th. So just prior to this first Sunday. And the last part says that we commission Randy and Sherry to the Lord's work in St. Clement's and other areas as the Lord directs. We commend them to believers everywhere for the prayerful encouragement, financial support, and loving care that various Christians may have an opportunity to provide. And so not only is this Heidelberg's anniversary, it's also Randy and Sherry's anniversary, 25 years in the Lord's work. And we are tremendously indebted to them as well for their work among us these 25 years. And tomorrow, Randy will be speaking and he'll have a chance to share some of his reflections and thoughts about these times as well. So right from the start, the intent was to get a building of our own. They knew that renting a facility was not a long-term solution. It was a tremendous amount of work, and maybe we'll hear a few stories about just all that entailed on Sunday mornings to get ready to have meetings in the St. Clement Center. And so they were looking for property to buy. Most of the land around St. Clement's that was available was floodplain land, and so there was a lot of issues with having to build on something like that. There were very few buildings available that were suitable. One building was the St. Clement's Hotel, right on the main corner of St. Clement's of Lobsinger and Herget Road. Now, I should mention that the burden in starting the work in St. Clement's was that there had never been an evangelical church in St. Clement's. And so it was very much focused on, we want to establish a testimony in St. Clement's. And so when this school building came up for sale, the question was, well, that's Heidelberg. That's not St. Clement's. Our vision is St. Clement's. And so there was quite a bit of, I don't know if the right word is unease, but certainly some people felt quite strongly that, no, we should stay in St. Clement's. And so the building was originally listed for sale at $350,000, and that really was too much money. It was more than what the group budgeted and had available. I mentioned the debt that was owed to Wallenstein. Wallenstein gave this new group a forgivable loan of $200,000 to use towards purchasing a building or property. And there was another significant gift of $100,000 from an individual. And so they had some money, but not a whole lot. And so they finally said, we're going to put an offer on the hotel in St. Clement's. The asking price was $250,000. They offered $250,000, and it was turned down. And this was a real blow. And so someone said, well, let's make an offer on the Heidelberg School. And we're not going to offer $350,000 like they're asking. We're going to really lowball. And if the Lord is in it, we'll get it. And if he's not, well, we'll keep looking. And so they offered $250,000. What they didn't know was the night before that the school board had met to discuss this school building that had been for sale for 2 years now. And the board decided, we're going to drop the price dramatically to $250,000. And the next day, the offer from St. Clement's Bible Fellowship landed on their desk. Sold. And so St. Clement's Bible Fellowship became Heidelberg Bible Fellowship. And that is from the Woolwich Observer, a picture taken in June, I believe, of 2022, and the building as it looked at that time. As well, there was a developer that owned a piece of land sort of back in behind here and had grand plans of development, but was stymied by the township and regulations they had. And so he made that piece of property available to us as well. And so we bought that piece of property, a good part of which is now the parking lot. there wasn't really a parking lot. There was sort of a parking lot, a bit of a parking space at the front. And they knew that if this is going to be a church, that we're going to need a parking lot. And that actually involved quite a bit of engineering work to bring about as well. We didn't have this addition here. All we had was the classrooms, and the classroom upstairs on the left, which is where became our meeting room. It was actually offices. It was the principal's office and a few other things. And so the first thing they had to do was to tear out all of these offices. The floor had a big sag in it, and so they had to jack it up and then put new floor and new ceiling in. And so the first few times they didn't meet in that room, they met in the room across the hall. But then eventually, this is what the meeting room looked like. And I don't have the exact date, but it would have been November 2022, maybe December, that the first meetings were held here at the Heidelberg School. And 2002, what did I say? Yeah, 2002. Thanks, Ken. And you can see that that room was pretty packed, and there was no air conditioning. There was a window banger unit that we used in the summer, but it was pretty hot. And our family, Sharon and I and our kids, we came to Heidelberg just after we began meeting here in the school. And you can see all the kids piled in there as well. So right from the start, there was an understanding that we're going to have to build a bigger addition to house our main meeting, because the classroom just wasn't a feasible long-term solution. They looked at the possibility of making that upper area one big open room, but the engineering was going to be quite complicated. And so the decision was to build. And so in late that year, work began with engineering and drafting and so on. And the following spring, work began on building an addition, this room that we're now sitting in. And the first thing that had to be done was all the bricks had to be stripped off the back end of the old part. And then the work began. We had some old order Amish men coming to help lay the bricks and do some of the construction work. It was quite a construction project, and a lot of our people did a lot of the work. There's a ton of sweat equity that went into this building. You see George Hicks is with the Lord now, happily up there with the paint. And of course, there's a lot more pictures on the slideshow, but I just got a few of them. Remember this fellow? And it wasn't just the women, it wasn't just the men, the ladies helped a lot as well. This is what I'm standing on right now. And initially we had no backdrop, we just had bare concrete walls. Someone came up with the idea of the curtain divider. So that was the backdrop here for quite a number of years until we were able to finish off this part. So just a bit of a taste of what went on there. The first baptism we held in here, I believe, was our brother Dan. I'm not sure. Do you remember what year that was, Dan? (2009 or 10). Okay. The total cost to build this whole room and the addition was around $800,000, which, I'm not sure what it would cost today, but I'm sure it would be at least double, if not more. But it was a lot of sweat equity that went into it. And it finished in May of 2005. There was still a lot of unfinished parts. The backdrop, the kitchen wasn't finished, but it was usable. And it would be nice to say that we just went forward from there and it was all good. But in fact, just as all of this was going on, the building project, there were a lot of underlying tensions that were also coming to the surface. And that tension and division just grew, and it came to a head at a congregational meeting in the spring of 2005. And there were two very different views of what our church should look like. And there was an attempt to try to find a middle road, good idea. And a proposal was made about this middle road, and the vote was a 43-43 tie. It couldn't be more divided. And as a result, a significant number left. And so we were left, those of us who stayed, with, I think, 38 adults, and I'm not sure how many children, and a nice new building and a massive mortgage. And could easily have been one of those stats, the 1 in 5 or the 1 in 3 churches that don't make it. But by the grace of God, we carried on, and we were able to arrange an interest-only period on our mortgage. And bit by bit, the Lord brought in more people, and things went forward. And the one thing that was really significant was that those of us who were left, we were completely united. We were all on the same page. And the scriptures tell us that where there is unity, the Lord commands the blessing. And that was the case, I think. It was a very difficult time for many that had been part from the first, people that they had worked closely with and had really grown to love and appreciate. It was like a divorce in many ways. And it was a very difficult time for those of us who were left. It was a very difficult time for those who did leave, and many went back to Wallenstein and so on. But by God's grace, the work carries on. And I didn't spend a lot of time pulling up a lot of history of what happened since then. Obviously, you have come at different stages. Some of it you know, some of it you don't, but we've certainly had our ups and downs since then. Every time someone leaves, it's painful. Every time someone new comes, well, it's encouraging, and it's a delight to meet new Christians and to see them getting involved in things here and taking part of the ministry. We've had some significant tragedies, but we've had some tremendous encouragements as well, and even just as recently as our baptism a few weeks ago. And so we thank the Lord for the things that he's doing. Just a bit about, those are the men that served as elders after the split in 2005, and then later Ted and Bob and Paul served, and Hank and Andy, although not recognized as elders, have given us a lot of help as elders. And of course, Rob, we mentioned, and Deacon for life. Outreach. One of the things that has been a big part of HBF is outreach, and we've tried to do different things. Our men's breakfast, we've been doing that every year since at least 2004. I can't find out for sure if it was before we came to Heidelberg. Children's things, literature, and so on. So the next 25 years, I didn't know what to put here. And then when Hank chose that first song, I thought, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. And if it's the Lord's work, it will carry on. But certainly, you look at Randy and Ken, they were in their late 20s, early 30s back in 1999. None of us are getting younger, we're all getting older. And so there is a great need for a new generation of leadership. We can't slack off on outreach. There's a tremendous amount to be done, and we thank the Lord for the various ones that have been very active in that in the last few years. And and maybe we need to think about hiving off ourselves. We leave that to the Lord and to his direction. But the same God who has been faithful these past 25 years to us will be faithful and sustain us through the next 25 years if he doesn't come, and beyond that if need be. So sorry that went a little bit longer than what I had intended, but I hope that is informative. And as we think about our identity, now you know a bit more about who we are and where we've come from. And Certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me afterwards. But I'd like to invite our panelists to come up now, and we'll just take 15 minutes and we'll wrap up by 8:30. But I think it's important to hear from these people that were part of the beginning. And I mean, we could have everybody up, but that would be a little bit unwieldy. So I've asked 5 to come and to speak sort of on behalf. I've got a few questions I'm going to ask them. So panelists, if you want to come up and need a few chairs. So as an amateur historian, you always want to go to the source. You've been hearing secondhand, third-hand knowledge. Now we've got the people who are really there. I've had some conversations with some of them, but the one thing I'm always interested to hear is, what was it like? What was the thought process as you thought about leaving your church to start something new, kind of going into the unknown, hoping that it's going to be successful, but knowing that maybe it's not? Like, was there fear? Was there doubts? Or were you just really confident this is what the Lord wanted for you and your family? Ken, you want to start us off? Get the mic. Enjoy. Feel free to.
So there'd been, like at Wallenstein, we had kind of grown up with, we had, as you noted, other works that had hived off from Wallenstein. So we were used to seeing our friends go off and start. In some cases it was Alma or Woodside. So it was always sort of maybe sometime I would need to be part, or it could be something like that. So it was not a foreign thought to us.
But for your family, Joy, was that something that?
Yeah, I think it was, mixture of exciting and scary. Just not knowing exactly what it would look like or how we would get it going. Ken's just reminding me that I was part of a hive off as a young girl, but
Right.
I think I don't have very clear memories of that. Yeah. I think for our kids too, they were feeling a little, or I was feeling a little sad that they were leaving a lot of their friends behind, but some of them came along too.
Delphine, you weren't part of Wallenstein at this point. You were at another church and you decided to come and join this young group that was just starting off. What was your thought process? How did that come out?
Well, I was at Lincoln Road at that time. And I think I was more lost and not sure where I fit in at that point. And I think it was just the timing of the Lord that started the work here, and it was a small work. So it was easy for me to fit in, and I knew a lot of them that were here because I'd grown up with them. And so for me, I think it was the timing that the Lord was saying, I think that's where you need to go. Lincoln Road was very large, and so it was hard to fit in. But with a group like this, I could feel like I could be a part and work along with them and to get the work going.
In case you're wondering, Glenn and Delphine were not married yet at that point. And Jim and Mark, what are your memories or thoughts?
Well, it was both exciting and scary. And I think I had some of the same feelings that Joy had. Our 2 youngest children were just coming into youth group age. And so it was hard as a mom to pull them away from that, even though I knew the work was important and that we were called to make that change. Our oldest son didn't come with us. He stayed at Wallenstein. And it was a real challenge to help the kids, especially at that age when they're leaving all their friends behind and basically starting over because there wasn't very many their age. There was, I think, 4 kids at the beginning, Corey and Crystal, and then Brad Martin and Katie Lewis. So it was, we started a youth group then almost right away, and they invited in friends, and it evolved from there. But it was, I found it more challenging, I think, than Jim did. Did you have a question? No.
So I can be a little bit bullheaded sometimes. And for me, it goes back beyond like probably a year or two before this came to fruition. The leadership at Wallenstein at that time was going through some of us young guys. I was young then, believe me. And Ken and I remember we both were invited to take a Wednesday night Bible study. And I forget who all had what subject or whatever, but I was supposed to speak on the life of Gideon. Gideon as a man of faith. So I studied into his life and what, so that just kind of is something that stuck with me. God told him to go. He was hesitant. He had his questions, but God was faithful and answered. And it's been a theme in my life that God is faithful. I don't understand him. I don't understand what he's doing. But that was kind of the backdrop when I say I'm a little bit bullheaded. I had it in my mind, we need to go to St. Clement's. And as this whole thing formulated, I just felt unstoppable. Like, this has to happen, and we're going to make it happen, and God is with us. What could possibly go wrong? So what's everybody dragging their feet for? Let's get up and go. And that being said, there's a challenge with that as a man, as a father, as the head of the home. And you take your family into a situation like that. And you know, like I knew Marg was hesitant. I knew the kids weren't exactly 100% on board, but I felt this is what we need to do. And like I said, God's been faithful. And we worked really hard them first years. Sunday was not a day of rest, let's put it that way.
One of the themes that I've heard from different people was how when this group began in St. Clement's, how there were a lot of people who, when they were at Wallenstein, were fairly not inactive, but certainly not as visible in doing things, and that coming out to Heidelberg, that all of a sudden they were getting engaged, doing things they hadn't done before. What sorts of things did you find yourselves doing that were out of your comfort zone, or were new things that you wouldn't maybe have thought about doing if you were still back at Wallenstein or Lincoln Road, but all of a sudden you found the Lord having you do as part of the new work?
Everything. I had always had a vision to be involved with youth work. Don't think I could have imagined myself of taking on the large number of kids at Wallenstein, but we had 4, and we told our kids that if you want to have a youth group, we're going to have a youth group, but you're going to have to invite your kids, your friends. And so we had 4 kids that were Christian or raised in the church. And we would often have I don't know, 12, 15, 16 kids. Like the rest were all kids from town, kids from high school. And Deli was part of that and a great team player. And man, if you can keep the whipped cream where it belongs, we're in good shape, Deli. Oh my, we had so much fun. But yeah, that would have been one thing.
Others?
Yeah, just the big thing was the youth group and
I remember, I think it was soon after some people left and went back to Wallenstein. It was Christmas coming up and I found myself involved in planning a Christmas program, which is completely not me. But I'm thankful for Karen Martin, who was more the brains behind that. I was the helper.
Mine was be the youth group helping out with the youth.
Now, I've heard that the children's ministry was quite a challenge at St. Clement's in the community center because of lack of space. Tell us a bit about that. How did you cope with, how many kids would there have been? Like 20, 25 kind of thing?
Every corner was used. Top of the stairs, the bottom of the stairs. The nursery was in the kitchen. The closets. Chairs were pulled out and then the kids were set up in their Sunday schools. And dividers were put up.
I saw a table in one of the pictures with all kinds of books. Was that sort of a portable library?
The portable library, yep.
yes, when you're like, if you're a Sunday school teacher, my first Sunday school class was in the coat closet. And so you had to shove all the hangers to the end and then duck in under the bar and that was where my first Sunday school class was, but everything came in bins and went back home again at the end in bins and well, you and Corey would come in and
Yeah, Corey and I, we would head over around 9 o'clock in the morning. And we never knew what we were going to be faced with. There may have been a party the night before or a wedding or something, and we'd come in, table set up, just like kind of like what's here. Except everything's loaded down with trays and beer bottles and leftover food and dishes and whatnot all. And whoever had the hall before us the night before didn't understand there's a church meeting in the morning and their instructions were to clean up before they go home. Well, I think they had enough trouble finding home, some of them. So we would come in the morning and we'd have to make this party hall into a respectable church. And boy, we flew some Sunday mornings. Like it was, we'd come in, sound system would go up, I'd throw a tape in. And by the way, I was the first sound man. I'm not looking for a job.
Nothing comes to mind.
I noticed that one of the first expenditures for the new group was an overhead projector for $800. That was the capital purchase of the first year. And then the piano was only $600. So someone did some good shopping. Tell me just one thing that just stands out in your mind about what the Lord taught you in those early days at St. Clement's. You know, if there's something or some memory you have that was really significant where you thought, really, the Lord is in this. Is there anything that comes to mind? I know I haven't prompted you with these questions, but just looking back, is there anything that comes to mind where you can say, hey, that was the Lord?
I would say working together as a team and that Yeah, and just sticking it out and the commitment it takes to make something like that in a building that doesn't have separate rooms, but you all have to work together to make it work. It did get frustrating probably at times for all of us, but it taught us patience. And that the Lord does work through mysterious ways sometimes.
I've been known as a man of few words. No, just one thing I discovered was, along with being kind of bullheaded and focused, I can get quite set in my ways and my path. And the Lord put me together with other people that I had to work shoulder to shoulder with that thought differently about things. And finding that you can find common ground, work together, and genuinely love people that have quite strong opinions different than your own. I think that was just quite amazing.
And we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Jim. I think too, for me, I think I probably had my vision of what a local church should be like. But I think that as I've matured, I've maybe ripened a little bit in terms of a personal walk with the Lord. I think maybe, we can be taken up with things like form and function and not the heart. And so I think that for me, that's maybe been my journey, is learning and being taught in some of those ways, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you very much, panelists. I would have liked to have had more time for this, but I think the evening's getting on, so we'll wrap it up there. But thank you very much for participating in this, and I'm sure if you have questions for any of them, they would be happy to talk for a while about this. And I don't know if the rest of you that were part of this first group, would it be worthwhile just to all get together and have a chance to reminisce and talk about those early days? Maybe we could do that tomorrow night after the corn roast if there's interest there. But I think we'll wrap it up here for tonight. Henry T. Winkle was part of that first group. And Henry, would you be willing to close in prayer for us tonight? I'll bring the microphone. You're not quite as young as you were in that one picture I had up there today.
Okay. Well, it's been a wonderful evening. I think we all agree. And what a privilege to reach this milestone as a church family. So why not bow our hearts in grateful thankfulness? Our gracious and loving Heavenly Father, once again, we pause to give thanks. And we're so grateful for the fact that during all those years, your faithfulness was very, very evident. And we've been singing that together tonight with all of our hearts. And so again, we just pray that you will continue to go before us into the years ahead. And it may not be very long because your coming may be very, very soon, at any moment. And so we want to make the best of our time that you have allotted to us. And together, as members of the body, we can function according to your will. You are the head. And so we have full confidence, even though we feel weak and inadequate. But you are our strength and all in all. And so we once again offer our thanksgiving in Jesus' name, and for your glory we pray. Amen.